Imagine a skill that elite college freshmen could build, which would help in every single challenge that you have in college. A skill that transcends context, that solves the root challenge, creating a problem so that it doesn't come back up again. Something that could help you level up your journaling so that you can grow your emotional centeredness, your self-understanding, and your purposefulness. Something that could help you study and learn more effectively in school and personal passions. That could strategize for a purposeful career alongside AI. That could help you build intrinsic motivation and self-regulation. That could grow conscious relationships and get better grades. And perhaps could help you do what this channel is actually about, pursuing spirituality. My friends, I introduce you to the most undervalued college freshman skill, going meta. Now, why am I telling you this before we dive into what that even means? Well, over the last 5 years, I have created over 600 YouTube videos, newsletters, podcasts, and 4 video courses to an audience of 10,000, all around, in many ways, this concept of going meta, whether it be on journaling, on self-improvement, on motivation, on learning, on gamification, or spirituality. And I've made 2 of my own meta theories. I've made a theory on learning, teaching, and knowing called Spiral Knowing. And I've also made a theory, which we'll be diving into this video, called the meta hexagon. And the reason it's called that is actually, it's not what you think it is. It's very nuanced, which is if you count the sides on the shape, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is a hexagon, and you use it to go meta. You have permission to leave the video now if you don't like that joke. So, with that being said, what does going meta actually mean? Well, going meta means stepping out from the frames that you're using to relate to reality, the frames you're using to sense, to perceive, to feel, to think, becoming self-aware, self-referential, self-creating. The metaphor I like to use is taking off your glasses that you've been using to frame reality and actually looking at them. What is it made out of? How does it make you see differently? So some examples would be becoming aware of how your college friends are impacting your emotions, your thoughts, your beliefs, your behaviors, and whether you should stay with them or not. You've stepped outside of the friendship and looked at it like the friendship glasses instead of just being in it. Another example is reflecting on the ways that you can study and learn more effectively to get better grades and learn more. No longer are you just studying and learning whatever technique you usually use, but you're thinking about the meta principles behind studying and learning more effectively. Another example is evaluating whether college is about getting you set up for a great career or whether it's about learning. What is the purpose? Maybe it's both. Maybe it's neither. That's up for you to figure out by going meta. Another example is me referencing myself telling you about going meta in this YouTube video. Ta-da! We've gone meta on the fact that you are literally watching me tell you about going meta. We're going meta on going meta. You're going to see that a lot throughout this video. Another last example is imagine you were playing Zelda, and as you were playing with Link, gliding around, navigating the various puzzles in the world, suddenly Link turned around, looked you straight in the eyes, and said, "So, how are you enjoying the game so far?" That would really startle you, wouldn't it? The character has gone meta to the fact that they are a character in a video game and you're playing them. So with these examples, why is going meta valuable? More in depth, on top of what we said earlier. Well, one of the main things is that it improves your ability to do everything in the long term. It helps you improve the process through which you get better at everything instead of just focusing on the outcome. So an example would be becoming a general specialist in your career. Going meta helps you realize how you can specialize in certain areas and generalize across many strategically to differentiate yourself in a world of the internet and AI. It can help you create conscious relationships because you can think, what are the meta principles of what makes a great relationship? What makes a great friendship or romantic relationship or family relationship? How do I find those relationships and how do I cultivate them to be deeper? It can help you in studying by thinking about what the meta principles of learning more effectively are. What leads to deeper retention, deeper encoding, so that you don't need to study for the thing that you learned at the beginning of the semester all over again as if you never learned it at the end. And you can actually remember things from year to year and start connecting stuff together. It can help you fulfill your survival needs better by thinking about the meta principles of fulfilling those survival needs. How do you build more self-esteem? How do you make yourself pursue a career that is profitable and potentially can even make you financially free? Another reason going meta is so powerful is it can help you build your emotional centeredness. You go meta on what emotions even are. Think about that. Have you ever asked that question truly deeply for hours? What are emotions? Going meta helps you realize that there are many parts that make up yourself, and each of these parts is trying to help you in their own unique way. They are often created through specific experiences or context in your life, and none of them are good or bad. They're just trying to help you in the way that they learn to during that time, which may be maladaptive for the season of life that you're in right now. And going meta helps you see what parts make up who you are and how can you have them in conversation with each other to help you navigate your life. It also helps you develop your self-understanding. And I don't mean self-understanding in a basic sense, like, what emotions do you have? What thoughts do you have? And why do you have them? I mean, really deep. I'm talking helping you navigate your shadow, the parts of yourself that you have either attached to wholeheartedly, so addictively that you don't even realize you're attached to them, or the parts of yourself that you have completely avoided. You have an allergy to them and they have been repressed into your unconscious, which doesn't mean they're gone. They're bubbling up in there. And the more and more years that they're avoided, the stronger that they will get and the more that it will project out into the world. Going meta through journaling or whatever other reflection practice helps you uncover this shadow and then navigate it. It also helps you develop your purposefulness. If you don't define your purpose as a college student, you will live someone else's purpose without realizing it. Because you have to be doing some sort of purpose. Otherwise, you wouldn't move at all. There's an infinite amount of stuff you can pay attention to. You could pay attention to the way my hands are moving right now, or the stars in the back, or this microphone. Purpose hones that attention down. It is a meta way of figuring out what to focus on. And it's very important, therefore, that it is something you've consciously decided to focus on yourself. And if that's something that's of interest to you, all of the stuff that we're talking about here is more embodied inside of my free college freshman cosmic journaling kit, which is a gamified journaling system with over 1,000 journaling questions and 5+ journaling templates that hits on a lot of these areas and will help you journal about specifically these things in your own life. So if that sounds interesting, check it out in the description below. Anyways, another valuable aspect of going meta is that it helps you consciously create yourself. Now, what I mean by that is throughout our existence on Earth, weird, funny way of saying it, we are socialized by our family, our friends, religion, science, whatever. And unless we're consciously aware of how we've adopted certain values or behaviors or even emotions or even the perceptions that we have of our sensations, then we will survive that collective self without realizing it. This doesn't mean that we've been socialized in a bad way. I'm not saying that all of this is bad. It's completely relative to the season of life that you're in. But going meta helps you step out from that socialization and consciously think about if it's what you want to be pursuing, what values you want to have, what emotions you want to experiencing, what relationships you want to have, what beliefs you want to hold. Going meta helps you look at that. Going meta also helps you see the bigger picture. Instead of taking individual classes and not really seeing how they connect, you are able to step out from what is in your major from a high level view and see how everything connects together in a great web. And then how it connects together to other disciplines. And you can do that in any area, in your relationships, how your friends all connect together, how one friend interacts with another and how that affects you. Any area, it helps you see the entire picture instead of a reductionist view. It's also at the meta level where the most valuable things in life are found. Meaning, relationships, peace, positive energy, spirituality. These are all meta aspects of living life. And finally, and the most important thing that going meta helps you do is pursue spirituality more deeply. It does this in two different ways. It helps you grow up and wake up. Growing up, I mean the process of transcending and integrating how it is that you make meaning from reality. There's some great work by a lot of transpersonal psychologists and anthropologists and so much more on creating a meta map for how it is that we grow up throughout society, from history as well as to the current day. And they've mapped various levels that people consistently go through in their development. One of the most incredibly insightful theories is integral theory by Ken Wilber, which helps you do exactly this. By going meta on development, you're able to transcend and integrate different stages of development more consciously. It also helps you with the other part of the spiritual path, which is waking up. This is what you actually see in consciousness. Not just see, but just what your experience is. And these cannot be separated. Going meta helps you integrate growing up and waking up. Waking up is in everyday life, sort of like experiencing things on a gross level, like your matter, your body, maybe if you're a little more awakened, your mind. But it goes so much further. It goes to subtle, causal, and non-dual states, which we won't go into yet. And importantly, the structure level that you're at inside of development, that structures how you interpret those states that you get into. So you can experience a non-dual state. You can literally awaken, and yet if your structure level in that spectrum of human development is not very high, you will interpret that in a very low consciousness manner. And so what going meta helps you do is integrate these two pathways of spirituality together, growing up and waking up together, which is what they were always meant to be. And yet for much of history have not, because in many ways, growing up and waking up map to West and East in terms of spiritual and religious traditions. And this really helps you integrate those together. Now that we've gone over all of the valuable aspects of why going meta is so powerful, it is necessary for us to talk about what are some of the traps that you can get to going meta. And this will help you navigate the meta jungle in a much more conscious and deliberate manner. I made a lot of these myself, which is why I wrote them down. But I've also gotten them from watching other people try and go meta and seeing some of the stumbling blocks that are common to this incredibly powerful and yet difficult to embody territory. So perhaps one of the most common traps is mistaking the map for the territory. The map of the territory is not the territory itself. It's an abstraction. Because if it was the territory, the map would be so big that it would be useless because you'd just be on the territory. So it can be easy to mistake this, though, because if the map is so good, so detailed, so colored in, so well topographied, it can be so tempting to just think that that is the territory itself. And we do this in everyday life all the time without necessarily realizing it. For example, the concept of a quark is not the same as the experience of a quark itself, or what the quark actually is. If you get more into quantum physics, a lot of quantum physicists are now starting to realize that a quark is not really a particle with solid matter in space. It's in some ways better understood as fluctuations in the quantum field. And the reason that we think of a quark as a particle is because it's a useful concept. It's a useful way of understanding what a quark is. But it is not the quarkness itself. There's a difference between quality and quantity. Qualia, or it's a better way to say qualia. The qualia of something is the experience of it. The concept is the relative truth you attach to that experience. The experience of eating peanut butter is not the same as the word peanut butter. The math symbol for 5 is not the same as whatever that 5 is representing in the world. So when you start going more meta, do not mistake the relative concepts or meta theories or whatever as the thing itself. Very important. Another common trap is mistaking the content for the structure. The content is the face value of something, whereas the structure is the way we relate to that thing. So an example would be, let's say, like happened to me actually, that you leave your first friend group as a freshman because you didn't vibe with them. And content-wise, this is seemingly going meta because you saw that you didn't vibe with the friend group. You're looking at the friend group on a meta level. But structure-wise, it's not going meta because you didn't really ask why. Like, what do you value in a friendship? And why did those people not embody that? What was lacking? There wasn't a meta-structural relationship to the leaving. And this content structure dichotomy applies to going meta in every area. Another trap is mistaking understanding for appreciating. This is especially common if you're not as deep in spirituality. It can be super tempting to mistake the understanding of propositions as the appreciating of those propositions. So for an example, let's say you understand the importance of health. why you should sleep early, why you should eat healthily, why you should exercise. It seems so obvious to you. But if you don't do it, then there's not an appreciation of it, which I really relate to because I grew up in a family that was very health centric. And I was very lucky in that manner, as a lot of the health habits I have now, I didn't really have to try that hard for. So it's hard for me to appreciate just how difficult it is for other people. But knowing the difference between understanding and appreciating is really helpful for me because it illuminates a difference in how it is that you can embody something. There's embodying something on a propositional level, understanding the statements and what they mean. But then there's embodying it on a participatory level, the way you literally relate to reality. Relating to reality through a health conscious lens is very different from understanding the importance of the health conscious lens. And this applies to all aspects of going meta. It's also very helpful for explaining these ideas to your friends if you try and do that at some point, which good luck. I hopefully they'll resonate with it. But there is a tendency with spiritual insights, because they seem so obvious when you say them sometimes, to do this exact trap, which is mistaking the understanding for the appreciating, when it's the appreciating that's the most important about going meta. Another trap is going meta in a conformist way. So let's say that you're thinking about how to use AI well as a student. So you start asking around, seeing what other students do in order to use AI well. Seems all nice and dandy. But the problem is that if you don't go meta on what it is that those other students are saying, how their relationship, their experiences to reality have shaped the way they believe AI should be used, and you don't go meta on what the actual meta principles of what AI even is and how it shapes your thinking, then how can you evaluate whether what they're saying is good? What if you get a student that says, yeah, I use AI in X way. I copy everything that the teacher puts on the slides, I feed it into the AI, and then when I ask my homework questions, it has all the information from the class for the homework. And then you think, that's genius. Why didn't I think of that? Which potentially could be genius for some classes. But what if that class is wrong? What if the class material isn't going meta, and by feeding the AI this and then using it to answer your homework, it's making you more conformist rather than less? Another trap is not going meta in deeper and deeper levels. There's layers to going meta. It's not just that you go meta and then that's the final layer. No, you can go meta, ongoing meta, ongoing meta, ongoing meta. It gets really deep. So for example, let's say you first go meta on how to study more effectively. The meta principles behind remembering things better, understanding better, applying them in a more effective way. But then, if you stop there, that's just getting the very lowest hanging fruit on the tree. What really starts to be valuable, especially for spirituality, is when you go meta on studying more effectively by asking what knowing even is. That's a question that'll really spin you for a loop. What is knowing? What does it mean to know something? And then, here's the funny thing, is if you go meta on that, then you awaken. Now, I can't tell you why that is. You have to experience awakening yourself. But this is why meta is so important, is because every single one of the things you can go meta on, if you go meta on enough, will lead to awakening. So this is why meta is so valuable. It's fantastic. Another trap is not going meta on your skepticism. When you first learn about this notion of going meta, it can be very easy to start saying, well, if I need to go meta on everything, then I'll just be skeptical about everything. And this can lead, for example, to a lot of new atheists. I used to do this, so I'm particularly aware of this. New atheists will embody this meta mindset, very skeptical, and they will apply it strictly to religion. They'll think, what ridiculous beliefs that there is this God in the sky, which, to be clear, I know a lot of more developed religious people don't see God as that, but we'll get to that later. There's this ridiculous God in the sky with like these faulty beliefs, and how could I ever believe any of this stuff? Look at these people. They've gone meta, but only on religion. They haven't gone meta on their very use of skepticism. They haven't gone meta on the skepticism. And they don't see that the skepticism is being used as a guise for validating their atheism. So don't fall into this trap of going meta, but not going meta on the very way that you're going meta. Meta. Another trap is not appreciating that going meta looks different depending upon your developmental structure. So I can tell you how to go meta, but I can't tell you as well as you can what to go meta on. Only you know what will be the most useful for going meta on in your place. Now, I've defined various archetypes of what my audience for college freshmen looks like. So I can give you ideas for what you might go meta on, but I cannot tell you itself what to do. That depends on your context. Maybe you need to go meta more on grades and your relationship to them. Maybe you need to go meta more on how you are hiding yourself from exploring new avenues by staying in your major and the classes there. Maybe you need to go meta on the very fact that you're pursuing spirituality too in depth for your survival needs in the moment, and you need to work more on your survival needs before you can go more meta. There's layers and layers to this depending upon where you are. Another trap is mistaking taking others' meta structures as going meta. Me telling you about going meta in this video is not going meta. It's the content, but in order to structure your relationship to going meta as going meta, you need to go meta on this video. Am I correct? Contemplate it yourself. Think about what going meta means after this. Does it align with what I'm telling you? Otherwise, the content of your meta will just be my meta, which is probably pretty meta. But you need to go meta on my meta before you can really go meta. A caveat that you should also know, this is another trap, is thinking that meta alone, going meta alone on less difficult things will awaken you. But the thing is, it won't awaken you if you don't navigate your shadow. Going meta helps with awakening, but the hardest part of going meta is navigating the aspects of yourself that you have become allergic to, that you have attached to too heavily and can't see. And those are ultimately the things that will have the most fear, the most effort needed in order to navigate. So when you're going meta at first, it can be tempting not to go meta there because it's hard. But it's these very things that keep you the most from awakening. So there's value in going meta in a non-threatening sense, but the most valuable meta is going meta on the things that threaten you, navigating your shelf. Yeah, you got to navigate the shelf with all your books on it. Doesn't make any sense. Another trap is only going meta in one quadrant of life. In Ken Wilber's integral theory, he defines 4 different quadrants through which you can spiritually progress in. And we'll go more into them later. But for me, the trap that I fell into when first getting into this is that I would focus too much on the individual interior quadrant, which is the upper left. I would focus on my emotions, my thoughts, my behaviors, my sensations, my perceptions through meditation, contemplation, and I would focus way too little on the other quadrants. And this made it very difficult to fully transcend and integrate the various shadow elements of myself so that I could grow up into deeper structural levels, because I was only doing so in one quadrant. And when I went into the other quadrant throughout my life, I felt like a fish out of water. So we'll talk a lot more about how to go meta in each of these quadrants so that you can do it more effectively as well. But that's another trap to fall into. Another and last trap of going meta is holding too tightly to your own meta maps. When you get into going meta and you get really good at it, it becomes sort of like an addiction. That's way better than cocaine. I know because I've created Spiral Knowing. This whole video is framed in the meta hexagon, which we'll go into soon. And these frames will get so good, these meta maps will get so good, especially if you look at something like integral theory, that you start to mistake them as reality itself. And ultimately, this actually can keep you from awakening, because once you awaken, everything collapses into isness. There is no room for your frame encapsulating reality, because in awakening, you realize that everything is everything. Everything is one. And the frame might be keeping you from that because you're like, no, this metamap is a stronger representation of reality than reality itself. And that resistance can keep you from what we ultimately want to do with this work, which is awaken. So those are some of the traps of going meta. And now we can finally explore what going meta actually looks like more in depth. Let's go meta more in depth. We talked about going meta as stepping out from the frames through which we relate to reality. But what actually is a frame in the first place? A frame is the lens through which you as an individual or a culture senses, perceives, feels, thinks, and relates to reality. You can go on your frames across 4 different life quadrants, as we were talking about earlier. The first life quadrant is interior individual, which is in integral theory, the upper left. This is what it's like to be you from the inside. Think your sensations, your perceptions, emotions, thoughts, values, the way you make meaning, your motivations. Then we have the interior collective, which is the shared emotional and meaning space between different people. Some examples would be the relationships that you have, the emotional attunement that you have to them, the communication styles. Are they more playful, bubbly, lighthearted, or more serious? The social norms between you and your friends or the classmates. Your group identity. What actually are you together? And also cultural values like achievement or belonging. Then we have the exterior individual. This is like it. This is what you do and what you believe your immediate self and environment is made of. So you can think your behavior, your skills, like if you're skilled at tennis or studying or communication, your health patterns, like your sleep, your diet, your exercise, performance, like what actually are your grades, what are the projects that you've worked on throughout school, and then what you think reality is, what you are made of. Like you're made of quarks, which make atoms, which then make cells, which then make up you. And then the last quadrant is the exterior collective, which is the lower right. And this is the systems that you live inside of, the institutions, right? You're in a college institution right now. You're in your dorm probably listening to this, unless you're just watching this among a whole bunch of other students at the library, which that would be really funny. They're over here just like studying, and then you're watching a video about going meta. Your exterior collective is also the systems inside of your institution, like grading systems, the job market outside of your grading systems, the government, It also includes the structures inside of college, like the hierarchies that are built up, students and professors and administration, the incentives inside of university, like why would you get good grades? What does getting good grades entail? It includes processes, like how are applications for college put in? How do you hand in assignments? When are they due? Stuff like that. Technologies, what technologies do you actually have inside of college, like phone or computer or whatnot. And it also includes shared, like, exterior collective meaning making things like principles or models or theories or the language that you use to communicate. English that I'm using right now to communicate with you. this this is not inherent to reality. This is a exterior collective aspect of the quadrants. So why are we talking about quadrants and going meta? Well, it's very important because awakening doesn't necessarily require all these quadrants, but transcending and integrating does. In order to transcend and integrate to ever more deeper perspectives and worldviews, you need to do so across all the quadrants because you're going to be in all the quadrants in your life. So with that being said, what are let's go through the meta hexagon, which I made on going meta. We're finally there. And the 6 ways that you can go meta using it with concrete examples about actually going meta in each of those 6 ways so that you can do all the things that we were mentioning before and get the benefits of going meta. So I'm going to flash the meta hexagon on screen. If you're watching audibly, you don't need to see it. It's pretty simple. And I think it looks pretty cool. But now that you see the meta hexagon, what are the 6 ways you can go meta? There's the first stage. There's 3 stages in the meta hexagon, and they just go in increasing complexity of going meta. The stage 1 is uniframe. So at this level of going meta, you're only looking at one frame still. Now, all the stages and the ways you can go meta connect and overlap, of course, because it all collapses into one in the end. But this is helpful differentiation for understanding how to go meta on a more concrete level. So stage 1 is uniframe, and the 3 different ways you can go meta there are defining a frame, reflecting on a frame, and evaluating a frame. Don't worry, we'll go into what all these are in a bit, but I just want to give you the map. Stage 2 is multi-frame, which is where you start handling multiple frames at the same time. So some examples would be reflecting on a frame and not reflecting on a frame, comparing frames and changing frames. And then finally, stage 3 is transcending frames, where you actually create your own frames, not that are already out there, but you create your own frames in a very conscious manner. So generally, you want to go linearly up the stages and ground farther and farther into the deeper parts of the meta hexagon. But of course, it's not as simple as just you do stage 1, then you do stage 2, then you do stage 3. You're doing all these at the same time in different ways when you start getting into going meta. But generally, you want to go deeper. And you can actually use the meta hexagon to break down how you're going meta across your life domains by changing the bars of going meta relative to each other. So every one of the 6 ways you can go meta, you kind of like put relative to the other ones how much you value it, how much you do it. And that rating is based on how much you relate to the world through that way of going meta, how much time you spend doing that way of going meta, what your behavior says about if you do that, how much you value a certain part of the meta hexagon, your comfort zone. Are you comfortable doing that? What cognitive style do you have? Like what one naturally resonates with you more? And then finally, your motivation, which is, how motivated you go to do each of these levels. So once you get more understanding about all the ways you can go meta, you can use this as a self-analysis tool to figure out where you are on going meta and then how you can build to going deeper and deeper, which is why I made it. So those are 6 ways of going meta. Let's go in deep into an example of each of those so that it makes sense. The first way to go meta in stage 1, uniframe, is defining a frame. This is becoming conscious of a current frame. You can think of this as the what. So it is literally taking off your glasses and just defining the material. So here we have some glasses. Unfortunately, no, they're not made of gold. I know, very sad. I'm highly not rich at this point in my life, but maybe in the future this will be different. So that's becoming conscious of a current frame. Some examples would be defining the emotions you experience on a daily basis and what context they show up in, as well as what internal or external triggers bring them up. It could be defining what your values are. And finally, defining what the culture is of your college. So, for example, defining the elite college you're at as having an achievement productivity culture. The next way you can go meta is reflecting on a frame. This is asking deeper questions than just defining it, asking why it's made of that material, how why that is coming up, how it makes you relate to the world, where it came from, and where it might lead you. So this is the how, the why, and the where questions. So with the glasses, this would be reflecting, how they came to be on your head. In this case, pretty obvious. I put them on my head. How they make you see things differently. For me, they don't do anything because they're prescription, and I mean not prescription, and I just wanted to look older because it makes my wisdom seem higher than it is. Got to artificially inflate the wisdom. And also where these glasses will be in the future, which I presume for the rest of this video will be on my head. But if a meteor comes down and strikes me out of existence, I mean, you wouldn't know because this video wouldn't be uploaded. So you can assume that didn't happen. But that, some examples of, my jokes are so stupid. Some examples of reflecting on a frame are reflecting on the emotions that came up during your day. Why did they come up? How are they affecting you? Where did they come from? And where might those emotions lead you in the future? Reflecting on values. Why do you value the things you do? How do those values make you interact with the world differently? Where did those values come from? Your parents, you consciously made them, whatnot. And also reflecting on the achievement productivity culture of your college. Like, why is that culture there? What historically might have led to that culture existing? Did your conversations with other students about how much work you had to do or how much sleep you didn't get, is that perpetuating the culture? All of these sort of questions. How is that culture affecting you? The next way you can go meta, and the last way in the uni frame, stage 1 of the meta hexagon, is evaluating a frame. This is judging or supporting a frame using some value / purpose / goal. So in this is like the so what question. If you took the glasses off, if I took the glasses off again, this would be like asking, how quality is this glass material? My guess is not very high, because I'm going to be real with you. These were like $20 on Amazon. Honestly, I'm surprised I haven't just accidentally broken them by putting them back on my head and taking them off. And how are they the correct prescription for you is another question that you could ask. So some examples of this would be with your emotions. Is your jealousy helping you or hurting you, and why? Is your anger or even your joy, is your joy helping you or hindering you? Maybe it's not. It's not just black or white, negative emotions are bad, positive emotions are good. Going meta can't makes it so black and white thinking doesn't work anymore. Then we have values, which is, how is your value maybe of perseverance helping you, or of grace, or of curiosity, or of achievement? Is that good for you? Is it bad for you? Why? And then finally, your achievement productivity culture. Is this hindering your ability to actually learn? Might it be improving your grades, actually? This is all what evaluation about. Then we'd move on to stage 2, which is multi-frame in the metahexagon. This is where you're comparing and evaluating. You're comparing, evaluating, and changing frames, and multiple at the same time. So the first way you can go meta in stage 2 is comparing frames, which is comparing and evaluating two frames with each other. So this would be like taking off my glasses, having another pair of glasses, which I should have gotten as a prop. Just imagine there was another pair of glasses right here. And now I'm comparing the two with each other, with them, to see how they're different. And if their materials of one is better, if the prescription of one is better for me, whatnot. So it would be like looking at your emotions, anger versus joy. How do those make you relate to reality differently? Is one better or worse? In what context? With your values, how is achievement comparing with wonder? And when are they better or worsening your ability to pursue spirituality or whatnot? And then your achievement productivity culture, comparing it with a learning culture, for example. And how do those make you relate to reality differently? When are they better or worse? The next way you can go meta in stage 2, multi-frame, is changing a frame. This is changing a frame by redesigning an old frame or experimenting with a new one. So this would be like, taking these glasses off, seeing I had another pair of glasses, liking those more, and then imagine these were the other pair of glasses, putting them back on and trying them out. So with emotions, it would be like, it sounds a little weird with emotions, but it's like, let's try out joy for my day. Let's try out being playful towards going into my exam rather than having terror. With values, let's try out being someone that values achievement more than values learning, or the other way around. With your achievement productivity culture, let's try out being in a culture that values achievement versus being in a culture that values learning. And how is that different? Finally, we have stage 3, the most profound stage in many ways, which is transcending frames. And the way you go meta in this stage is by creating frames themselves. Now, it's very important we don't mistake this for adopting a new frame that seems like it's different from what you've done in the past. This is creating an entirely new frame on top of simply changing the one that already exists. Like making a new pair of glasses, but essentially not making a new pair of glasses with a mold that already exists, literally creating your own mold and making those glasses. So with emotions, this would be like not necessarily creating a new emotion. Good luck doing that. But creating a new frame for how you interpret emotions at all. A good example of this was when internal family systems came out, and they created this frame of thinking of emotions as various parts of yourself all trying to help you in their own ways and navigating with each other. That's a new frame for understanding emotions, for relating to them. For values, it would be like when the first time that values were seen, as Leo Gurr in Actualize.org says, as a way of yourself surviving yourself, which we'll get into later. By having some sort of values, it grounds you in experience and gives you a way to relate to the world, which then allows you to perpetuate that experience. So it's a weird way of seeing values as like perpetuators of experience, but it's a new frame for seeing values. Frame for understanding culture. Maybe you create a frame that radically changes the way that you see what culture is. You stop seeing it as just like an amorphous blob and start defining it as the roles that people think they have to fill, the ways that they're surviving themselves, and how that is leading to the culture as a meta structure from that survival. Going back to integral theory and developmental structures, that's a way of going meta. By creating a new frame when that was first made. That's like going meta on how humans develop. Very, very meta. So now that you have the basic understanding of what the 6 ways you can go meta are, and also how to do them, the question then becomes, why don't we go meta? Why don't we go meta more? And that is a profound question. Why don't we go meta? We talked about all the benefits, the traps, how to go meta, but what actually is keeping us from doing it? Not only individually, but also collectively. Is a very interesting and powerful answer. So I want you to contemplate it for yourself before I tell you, so that you value the answer even more. I'm going to assume that you've done some contemplating to answer this question, a meta contemplation on why we don't go meta more. But with that being said, let's dive into it. We don't go meta because we're surviving our individual and collective identities. To understand this, I want you to imagine that you're in a movie theater watching a movie on a screen. Most movies only have visuals and sound in order to immerse you. But this movie is special. This movie has visuals, sound, smells, touch, all the senses. Even the ones that we don't typically talk about, like your sense of being embodied. It has all of them. It's so immersive that you forget you're even watching a movie. And what I want you to realize is that this metaphor is exactly like what happens in our everyday life. Our everyday life is full of sensations that feel real. We become so immersed in the movie of ourself that we mistake it for reality. The self in this context is the movie screen. The beliefs, the values, the emotions that you think you are. The self is the finite character that creates coherence and helps you navigate consciousness. And what I'm trying to help you see on a meta level is that what we actually are is the awareness watching the self do all of its things, the witness that has no ground, because to even define it as something is the witness witnessing you trying to define it. In the movie metaphor, it is the projector watching the screen. Ultimately, in full non-dual awakening, you realize the projector, the movie, they are not separate but one, and that you're actually the entire movie theater. But this illuminates why we don't go meta more, because to go meta is to break the movie illusion. Imagine if someone came into the movie theater and started shaking you back and forth and was like, "You're watching a movie." That would not be very nice, because the movie illusion is now broken. And that is exactly what happens when you go meta. You start to see how you're surviving your self-identity, how you're surviving your collective identity. And once you're aware of that, the illusion is broken. And you have to change. You have to die on a psychological level. Now, the insight here is that doesn't mean you should always go meta on yourself. There's a reason the self is there. Going meta too fast can lead to horror, losing your grip on reality. Not horror in the very unawakened sense of a scary monster on a movie screen. No, the very losing of your grip to reality itself. That is true horror. What we're looking for is not horror, we're looking for awe, which is witnessing a relationship to reality that breaks you out of your finite self bubble into the oneness of everything. Think of the feeling of witnessing an incredible nature landscape, a great mountain, a great river. That is awe. So that's one reason we don't go meta. Another reason is that shadow material is holding us back from going meta. Shadow material, as we mentioned earlier, is the things that we attach to either addictively or allergically in consciousness. We might attach to, for example, me, one thing that made my awakening in going meta harder to do is that I was addicted to the idea that I needed to help others more than myself because of how lucky I was to be born in such a privileged situation as a white male with US origins, speaking English. I was like, I can't work on myself. That's selfish. I need to help others. But I didn't realize that that was an allergy to self-work. And in order to truly help others, I needed to transcend that allergy and integrate it into myself. Integrate my shadow. Another reason we don't go meta is because we don't like the idea there are truths we can't hold to. When you get into this work, there might, even if you consciously don't say it, have an unconscious want for there to be objective answers, absolute truths, which, funnily enough, there are, but not what you think they are. There are not objective truths in the moral sense, the value sense. Even science cannot tell us objective truths because science cannot be used to validate itself. Something else needs to validate science, and then what validates that? So it can be very difficult to go meta because we don't like the idea that going meta will lead us to realize that there is not that thing that we can hold to concretely. It also seems impractical to go meta when there's all these exams and friends that you want to make and clubs that you could go to. And then you have this weird guy talking to you on YouTube about going meta. And it's like, why? Why would I do that instead of all the other things that I could be doing? Another reason we don't go meta is because society isn't developed enough to go meta as a whole. The more conscious a society becomes, the more that its structures, its processes, and its culture starts to break apart, because just like the self-awareness breaks apart the self, societal awareness would lead to the society realizing the ways that it's not being as conscious as it could be. And because society, the collective egos survive just like individual egos do, this can't happen. For example, ExxonMobil as a company. In order to be an ExxonMobil, you cannot fully realize the reality of climate change, because to realize and appreciate the reality of climate change would lead to you needing to leave ExxonMobil. And it's the same in society. If the college setting that you're in fully realized the negativity that the grade culture is creating for students' spiritual and even just career growth, it wouldn't be able to stay the same. Now, ultimately, as society develops more, we'll be able to go more and more meta, and you can be a part of helping that occur by watching this video. And the arc of history indicates this is going to happen. The society as a whole, of course, we've had a lot of stumbling blocks along the way, but as a whole, we've gotten more and more developed over time. So we're working with evolution, which is great. And then finally, the reason we don't go meta is because we don't give ourselves the time to reflect. Going meta requires deep contemplation and reflection. It requires days, weeks, thousands of hours in order to really go meta effectively, to break all the ways, become aware of all the ways that you're surviving yourself and collective self, and then more mindfully navigate college with that. It takes work and time. So those are some of the reasons of why we don't go meta. Now, let's get into the real meat of this video by taking all of the 6 ways that I described of going meta earlier and just really diving into some more examples as well as meta framing questions that you can use to go meta in that way. So that's what we're doing now is we have a meta theory for going meta. And now I'm going to give you meta questions on how to go meta in that meta theory. It doesn't get more meta than this. So the first thing that we have is defining a frame. Remember, becoming aware of a current frame, the what, the taking off glasses and defining material. And I just realized I didn't put my glasses on for the second half of this recording. So the whole joke I made earlier where I was like, well, I think my glasses are going to be on. They're not. I was wrong. So some meta questions that you can ask for defining a frame are, what are the parts of this frame? How do the parts make the whole of this frame? What context does this frame arise in? What does this frame do? And what internal or external triggers cause this frame? So some examples would be my daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and yearly review and reflection made me realize, frame-wise, that most of my best experiences in life have been physical, novel experiences with friends. I also realized that in one of my friends, their creativity frame only activates when they're in private. This is a friend who only writes or paints when they have free time and rarely shows it to others. Now, why that is, we need to go on to the deeper meta questions, but that was interesting. Another way you can define a frame is analyzing the meta principles of your psychology class on decision making. What are the heuristics, the biases, the emotional tendencies that exist in this class, and grouping them together by their groupings. You can also define the models of your calculus class, including what the derivative is, what integrals are, what the quadratic formula is, and then grouping them across where they show up in calculus. You can define the structures of growing up in the spiritual path that we talked about earlier. Now, ultimately, that'll be a way longer episode, which I'll make as well. But to give you some examples, 3 different structures of growing up that are very common in college settings especially are orange, green, and teal. Orange is a structure that is highly achievement-oriented, rational, materialistic, values more material, objective things a lot of the time, like money and sex and whatnot, but in a more awakened way than some of the lower structures in integral theory. Then we have green, which tends to be very pluralist, much more culturally relative, emotionally oriented, sort of in the stereotypical way, right brain instead of just left brain. Liberal a lot of the time. This is very common on college campuses. But third structure on top of those is teal, which is very systemic, holistic, critical thinking in its nature. It's the first structure out of these 3 that realizes the other structures exist and then transcends them and integrates them. So these are 3 structure levels that exist in integral theory. There's much more, but can you see how realizing these structures exist on a meta level would help you grow into them better? That's the power of going meta. Then we have defining structures of waking up, which, if you remember the 2 pathways of the spiritual path, there's growing up, waking up, which is about what you perceive, not what you perceive, what you sense inside of consciousness. What forms are there? There's the gross state, which is where you sense consciousness as material, body, maybe mind. The subtle state, which is much more about the intuitive, illuminative aspects of consciousness, subtle, literally subtle, emotional, embodied forms of consciousness, which go past just material bodily reality. And we have the causal state, which is where you're totally grounded in the formlessness of the witness, watching forms come into consciousness. And finally, the non-dual state, where you realize that those two things are actually the same. Form and formlessness, emptiness and form are the same. They are one. And defining this metastructure helps you push into those states better. Now, totally fine if you didn't understand that right there. That was a very fast explanation of waking up. But defining this frame will help you work towards that more in the future. Next way of going meta, again, is reflecting on a frame, which is asking how it affects you, why it affects you that way, where it's coming from, and where it might lead you. This is reflecting on the glasses and how they came to your head and how they make you see things. So some meta frame questions for this is, how is this frame affecting me or making me relate to reality? Why is this frame affecting me or making me relate that way? Where does this frame come from? Where might this frame go or lead to in the future? How does this frame explain something? Why does it explain it? What are the answers to all the above questions, but framed from a collective lens? Who am I when not operating in this frame? How might a friend interpret this frame? How do my individual and collective frames how do my individual frames feed into the collective? Have I consciously created my own frames, or am I following someone else's? What frames am I using to do this reflection? That's really meta. Where might my reflection process itself lead? Does that scare me? So, some examples of reflecting as a way of going meta. I realized my don't flirt with the opposite sex frame in college was framed by my high school humiliation, not college reality. So, little funny romantic relationship backstory. When I was in 10th grade in high school, there was this girl that I really liked in this private tennis coaching clinic that I went to. And at one point, she actually asked me out to a dance at the high school, which I said yes to. I didn't even know if it was a date. And after the dance, we ended up hanging out at her house on the couch watching The Mandalorian. And to this day, I just remember how awkward I made it because she was on one side of the couch and I was like all the way at the other, and I never moved closer. And it didn't lead anywhere, of course, because I didn't do anything. But I kept that frame going into college. I kept it valiantly as like, yes, I don't make women uncomfortable because I don't flirt with them too directly. And I didn't realize I was just surviving the frame that I had from that experience. And reflecting on frames helped me see that and be more mindful with how I come towards romantic relationships now. I've had 4. They've been profound in their own ways, but they were only able to happen because of reflecting on that frame. I also became aware, you can become aware of how you've been socialized through reflecting on a frame. Perhaps you've been socialized because you came from a really great upbringing with books and parents that pushed you to learn and with a financial safety net. Or perhaps you were quite poor and then you became much more affluent through hard work. And now, because of that, you have a more conservative, pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality. And reflecting on a frame can help you see how the beliefs, the values that you have might not be consciously come to, but rather because of the experiences that you've had and the socialization you went through. Another way to reflect on a frame is reflecting on how you know what you know. It's a profound question. What do you know? How do you know it? How can you know anything? Another reflecting on a frame is reflecting on the scripts that you come to friends with. Have you ever noticed this? Have you ever been in an interaction and after you left the interaction, you're like, it seemed like awfully like I knew what was going to happen in that interaction. It's because you're following scripts for how the interaction should be. There's the procrastination script, which is like very classically goes, man, I don't want to do this. because X, or I'm tired or whatnot, and then another person's like, yeah, and then you do something together. Now, there's very variations of that. That was like a basic meta generalization. But then there's also the busy script, which is like, hey, how are you doing? Terrible. I have X and X and X to do. How many times has that happened? Now, I'm not saying these scripts are inherently bad. I'm saying reflecting on them can help you see what scripts you're adhering to. And then if you consciously want to engage in them, I mean, I still do both of those scripts sometimes, but I do so consciously rather than doing them without even realizing the scripts are there. Another way you can reflect is how your health choices affect you across life domains. So sleeping early makes me, what I realized earlier in college is that I had this obsession with sleeping early because I was super health obsessed. And I would do this almost every single day, even on the weekends, so that I could do more content creations in the morning. I thought I was just being health conscious. And then when I reflected on the frame, realized that I was doing it because of how lonely I was at college, doing these two worlds of content creation and being a student. And sleeping early was my way of avoiding having to go out and socialize at night. It was protecting me from that shadow. Another way that you can reflect is reflecting on what purpose religion plays in society throughout history. So you might see that earlier in history, when humans were less developed, religion played mostly a shared conformity role by creating beliefs and validating going against what is considered evil and bringing people together based off of that, and giving rules for what roles people should play, which is really helpful at that structural development level, which much of the world is still in. It's called blue in integral theory, or amber in integral theory, and blue in spiral dynamics. And now the role that religion plays is much different depending on the structural level. A lot of religions, like some of my Christian friends at Cornell, they point to higher aspirational nature and being needs as incredibly important, which is a much more developed way of thinking about religion. And the mistake that people often make, because they haven't reflected on their frames enough, is they do the pre-trans fallacy, which is they mistake the old form of religion in those less developed parts of the world, and they project that onto the newer relationships with religion when they have an entirely different structural level. They mistake the content for the structure. So that's reflecting on a frame. Now let's move on to evaluating a frame, which, if you remember, is judging or supporting a frame using some purpose, goal, or value. Like taking off your glasses, assessing the quality of the material. Are they the correct prescription for you? Some meta questions of this are, what value / principle / goal can I judge this frame off of? How does this frame stack up to chosen value / goal / purpose? What frame am I using to evaluate this frame, and is that valid? How does this frame pragmatically help me? What might this frame be missing? What outcome would prove to me that this evaluation was fair? Some examples of this. I remember when I was in my freshman year at college, I really struggled making friends because I came from a rural background in Hamilton, New York, with more cows than women. And when I came to college, I didn't have the ability to make friends, which made me insecure over the people I talked to. And I latched onto the first friend group that I came across because of this. Now, eventually I lost that friend group, unfortunately, because I didn't realize they didn't resonate with my values. But once I did, and I reflected, I evaluated what values I even hold in a friendship. And I realized the values that I held before with that friend group were not the values of who I really wanted to be. I value deep spiritual growth with friends, overcoming of self-deception. And not all my friends need to have this, of course. That's like pretty high up there to find. But it made me see how none of the friends that I was with in that previous friend group had that. And that's one of the things that made me struggle so much with them. Another thing that going meta helped me do is seeing how my deep work mentality was actually hurting my ability to really immerse myself in college. I, like with my sleeping early habit, had this habit of doing deep work in the mornings when I was a freshman, where for sometimes for like 5 hours, I would do focused work, writing on my computer or creating content like I am right now. And I thought that I needed the mornings to always be open like that. Anytime someone was like, "Hey, do you want to get breakfast?" I was like, "No, it's during my deep work time." And evaluating this frame helped me see that for the purpose of building my relationships in college, which is way easier to do than when you're out of college, trust me, it was not helping me. And I needed to be a little less rigid with my deep work mentality. Another evaluative meta realization is seeing how your current strategy is working for becoming a general specialist in career. How well is what you're currently doing helping you specialize in some areas and generalize across a wide area to make yourself anti-fragile in the job market? I thankfully I asked myself this pretty early when I was in college, so I was very lucky, and that allowed me to start doing side projects all throughout college that built my skills in very strange connections that nobody else had. For example, a content creator who's into psychology, who's also really good at writing and into gamification and spirituality is a weird combination. And that's the exact thing that I do on this YouTube channel is I combine spirituality with meta learning with gamification in order to help you pursue the spiritual path. Another way you can go meta is going meta on why people act the way that they do and evaluating your meta map for that. So maybe beforehand you thought people were motivated by goals or their parents, and they are in some degree, but you evaluate that meta map and you realize that no, they're actually surviving themselves. They're surviving their collective selves too. You can also go meta by evaluating the ideologies that you've gotten from classes or from friends or from family. For example, one of the classes that I went meta on was game theory. And I have nothing completely against game theory. I think it's useful to some degree, but ultimately it's not nearly as conscious as some of the other theories out there. And it still treats human beings as these rational actors when we're very much not. And going meta through evaluating it helped me see where that belief was subconsciously showing up in my life and when it wasn't helping me. And then you can also go meta by evaluating whether a double major is actually helping you learn or is just your way of trying to survive your academic achievement self. I remember I met this one girl in a club that I was at, and she was literally doing two majors and two minors. And I just remember thinking, really? Like, there's now maybe she made it work. I don't know. I'm not her. Maybe for her season of life she was in, it was working. But I just don't, from an intuitive sense, see how that could possibly be to genuinely learn more. It's hard to process with that much information. Next, after evaluating, we go on to stage 2, which is multi-frame in the metahexagon. First one is comparing frames, which, if you remember, was about comparing and evaluating 2+ frames to each other. This is like taking two different glasses and comparing their materials, their histories. Some meta questions that you can ask for this is, how does this frame reinforce, diminish, or contradict this frame? How is this frame similar or dissimilar to this frame? Which of your frames tend to dominate the other ones? Is this frame better or worse than this other frame? What might both of these frames be missing? And lastly, what frame am I using to evaluate both of these frames? So an example would be seeing how your shadow material is making you interpret your current sense of reality. Your shadow material making you interpret all the different frames to which you come to reality with your health, your life purpose, your personal growth. Another example is seeing if your values truly align with the behavior that you're doing on a day-to-day. I had a particularly uncomfortable realization with this meta level because I realized a few months ago that my frame for productivity was really not helping me in my behavior. And the reason is my frame for productivity was a very meta productive frame. And that was not just being productive for time with output for my career, but input for how well outputted it aligned with my values. My productivity frame was literally how productive am I with following my values. And that was a problem because it sounds good in theory, but when that's your frame, the question can then always become, how do I become more productive towards my values? And there's like very little time to relax. And even your relaxing is made productive by thinking, how do I make this relaxing the most productive so I can keep following my values? Yeah. And so that comparison meta analysis helped me see how this productivity frame was not helping me. Another example is comparing STEM versus humanities with the worldviews that they give you. It's a very interesting one. You'll see how fundamentally different I, like as a psych humanities major, sees the world differently from STEM majors. You'll see the inside jokes that they make between each other, but also on a more fundamental level, how are the values different? How are the beliefs different? Stuff like that. Another way you can compare frames is compare ways of knowing something to each other. When you get deep into this, I have a whole theory on this, my spiral knowing theory, which I have a video on up above. And there's 3 different frames for knowing, which I made that you can look into. First and most basic form of knowing is propositional, which is knowing about things expressed in statements. So to give an example, let's say you're writing an essay on cognitive biases. The propositional knowing would be the actual words that you're using in that essay. Practical knowing is knowing how to do things, as well as your relative evaluations of those things. So some example in this case would be you're knowing how to write an essay about cognitive biases, how to structure it, how to outline it, how to rough draft it, how to revise it, the skill of writing. And then participatory knowing is knowing about how to relate to reality in a certain context, a certain agent arena relationship. So in this essay example, this would be knowing how your relationship to reality participated in the way that you wrote about cognitive biases. For example, maybe your relationship to reality is you think cognitive biases are the most primordial way that humans fool themselves into having a illusory relationship with reality. But what you don't realize until you go more meta is how cognitive biases are just the cherry on top. And the cake is surviving the self, as we've been talking about. Participatory knowing is the ground knowing of all the other forms, and comparing frames helps you see how those depths of knowing are different. And another thing you can do is compare states of consciousness to each other. As we talked about earlier, gross, subtle, causal, non-dual. You can also compare Buddhism awakening to my version of awakening and see how they differ. I'm not saying for all Buddhism, but a lot of Buddhism promotes a downward awakening, which is where you quiet consciousness down until you realize awakening through emptiness. Whereas I respect that form of awakening. My awakening often goes more in the upward direction, which is where you grow your consciousness so great that you experience yourself as absolute infinity, as spirit. And comparing on a meta level helps you see the differences, the values between both of those and where they might fall short. Then we have changing a frame, which is redesigning an old frame or trying on a new one. So with glasses, this would be like changing out the material or putting on a new pair of glasses and seeing how it works for you. Some meta frame questions here are, what different frame can I adopt that might help me with chosen value / goal / principle? Which other frames, personal, cultural, disciplinary, could I borrow or hybridize from? What evidence or experiences suggest this new frame might be more effective? Which individual or collective frames might resist this change? How can I change to that frame effectively? How can I redesign or reframe this old frame? What frames can I experiment with? How can I convince others to change to this frame? What feedback systems can I build to monitor whether this new frame is working? What signals will tell me that this new frame is taking root? How can I communicate this new frame to others clearly and empathetically? What metaphors or stories could make the new frame contagious? So some examples of this would be me trying out new time management strategies inside of my freshman year. I used to do school spread out throughout the entire week. I would do homework every single day for like an hour, hour and a half. Don't judge me. I was a psych student. It was easy. But I realized that that actually was making it harder to really focus on my studies when I was doing it. And I experimented with this new frame, which was doing schoolwork 2 days of the week for a long time, like the whole morning and afternoon, and then having all the rest of the weekdays and weekend to do content creation, hang out with friends or whatnot. And I like that frame a lot more. Another example is changing from a materialist frame to an everything is imagination frame. That is a very nuanced one. The materialist frame is that reality exists outside of us in an objective external manner. The imagination frame is that there is no reality outside of us. It's just in here, and everything is imagination. What I mean by imagination is that there is no external substance that constrains what reality is. There is just internal imagination creating reality. Sounds very out there, I know. This doesn't mean imagination is quote unquote unreal, illogical, incoherent. It can seem like those things, but changing between these two frames can help you see which one is more valid and where the benefits and drawbacks are. Now, I encourage you to try out changing between those frames yourself. Ultimately, I'll spoil it for you, everything is imagination. But do it yourself in order to really uncover the truth of that statement. Another way you can change frames is changing from one of your values to another after deep reflection. So for me, this one was weird because for a lot of my life, I've really valued curiosity, wisdom, and only after starting this channel, new niche direction of Conscious College, did I take in two different values, which I haven't really valued throughout my life, but I realize the importance of now. And that is the values of excellence, perseverance, and strategy. 3 frames, my bad. And the reason I adopted these frames is because I realized that I was getting in my own way with my YouTube channel beforehand, where I was so heck bent on curiosity and wonder that I would just create videos on whatever I wanted with not a clear niche direction. And it was hurting my ability to make content creation help me become financially free. And these values are meant to try and help me not do that. Now, you might be saying, well, Aiden, you're failing. You're making a 2.5-hour video on going meta. What's wrong with you? So, yeah, in a sense, I'm definitely not fully embodying the strategy element, but the way I like to validate it to myself is I'm also making shorter videos from the longer ones that help draw people in, and maybe they'll become interested in videos like these over time. Now, maybe I'm totally fooling myself, and then you can have a good laugh a year from now after watching this and be like, wow, Aiden's channel still isn't working, and I'll just be sad. So let's cross our fingers and hope that doesn't happen. Another example of changing frames is purposely trying to see the world through the lens of a conservative. I did this myself with Cornell Political Union. I I've had liberal values for most of my life. They've gotten more liberal over time, but I realized at a certain point in college that I wasn't really appreciating the intelligence and the wisdom in the conservative viewpoint because I couldn't actually make good arguments against anything they were saying. I was just kind of conformist liberal. And so I went into more conservative circles like Cornell Political Union, where it's not fully conservative, but they have both political sides. And doing a lot of debate in there, changing frames, helped me appreciate the value in both worldviews. Now, ultimately, I'm still very, very liberal, but I do so with an appreciation for the value of conservatism rather than blindly an allergic reaction to it as a shadow. Another way of changing a frame is trying to transcend and integrate your current structure level to go to the next one. So in the structure levels we were talking about before, this would be like going from green to teal, for example, and doing that by doing exactly this, like going more meta, being more holistic, ingraining systems thinking, seeing the value in every single structure level instead of demonizing any single one, and then moving to teal because of that. A last example of changing a frame is changing your frame for what love is from a feeling to a metaphysical relationship to reality, a direct relationship with the process of form and formlessness dancing their cosmic dance. That is a profound shift in how it is that you see love, instead of just this human feeling that you have, which is often just romantic infatuation, but has value as well. It's transcended and integrated into the new definition of love. So stage 3 is transcending frames. This is the last way of going meta in the meta hexagon, and this is creating a frame, which is creating an entirely new frame on top of simply changing to one that already exists. So in the glasses example, as said earlier, not making glasses out of a mold that already exists, not that form of creating, literally making your own mold and then making glasses out of it. Some meta frame questions here are, what values / principles / goals / purpose can I create this frame for? What other frames can I take inspiration from while designing this frame? What are the essential parts, relationships, and dynamics of this frame? How can I ensure it stays flexible, not dogmatic, as it spreads? How can I make this frame emotionally beautiful or awe-inducing? How can I prototype this frame to see if it even works? What assumptions am I unconsciously importing into this new frame? How might I over-identify with this frame once I make it? Now, I, of course, being the meta guy, I had to make meta principles for the principles of a great frame. You're probably not even laughing at this point. You're just like, yep, that's what this guy does. So some of those meta principles of a great frame, and apply this to the meta hexagon as I say this, because it follows a lot of these, is one, it's visual. It's something that you can see in Sketch. It clicks as a picture, not just words. Meta hexagon, the hexagon with space themes. It's insightful. How can this frame reveal deep truths about reality beyond just common sense? Meta hexagon reveals the deeper nuances of going meta, which is already an insightful thing to do. How can I make this frame applicable? How can you make it practical and useful? Hopefully, you've seen how asking these questions across various avenues of your life can actually be tremendously useful. This is what the meta hexagon is meant to do. It's practical and spiritual. How can I make this frame have layers? The more you explore it, the more you discover. I did this in the meta hexagon through the different stages, the 6 different ways of going meta, the breakdown that you can do where you can analyze how you go meta in relation to the other ways of going meta. Wholeness. How can I make this frame whole and accurately map lots of reality while also staying flexible to its complexity? The meta hexagon can't really go more whole than it is. I mean, it's literally just going meta on all the other parts of the wholes in reality. So it's sort of like the ultimate whole theory. Clarity. How can you make this frame clean, crisp, and coherent so you don't get lost in it? I think the metahexagon is pretty clear. Hopefully, I mean, it did take me 2.5 hours to explain, so maybe I'm kidding myself, but I could have added more ways of going meta. There's more ways, but they're kind of just offshoots of the 6 ways I'm talking about, and I think it would have just muddled it up. So think about that when you're making your theories. Interactive. How can you make this frame invite play, exploration, or personalization? I did that by giving you meta questions to ask, as well as giving you that breakdown that you can use. So it's literally you can use the actual meta hexagon in an interactive way. Synergy. How can I synergize this frame with other frames? Well, I've been synergizing it with other frames this whole video. I've been synergizing it with integral theory and spiral dynamics and Buddhism and so many other things. And you can synergize this frame with any frame you want. That's kind of the point, is it synergizes with any frame. It's a meta theory. Another question is, how can you make this frame timeless yet evolutionary? So if reality changes, this frame still somehow evolves with it. Now that's really hard to do, but the metahexagon is timeless and evolutionary because it is, there's always going to be the ability to go meta. And it's not like it's saying these are the answers to going meta. It's just a scaffold for how to go meta. So it evolves with time. And then finally, the mimetic simplicity of the frame is really important. How can you make this frame sticky, shareable, and sketchable so it spreads easily in people's minds? You know, it's one thing to create a frame, it's another to spread it. The metahexagon, it just looks cool. It's like a cosmic little hexagon, and it's a nice hexagon shape. Little cute little hexagon. So hopefully that makes it more spreadable. So yeah, those are some of the principles of creating a frame, but what are some examples of actually doing that? And keep in mind, you don't have to have all those principles every time you create a frame. That's a lot of time and effort. I'm talking more like the ideal world. So some examples would be coming to your own mastery principles of how to use AI, like how to prompt engineer well, how to context engineer well, how to train it on yourself, your own notes, your own values, your own emotions. Another example is defining your life purpose, creating the frames that you aspire towards to pursue that life purpose. Another example is separating out different player types for conscious college freshman students. So this is very meta. I'm going meta on you who are watching this video. I have 3 different archetypes that I talk to in each video, with some videos being skewed more towards some. Wisdom wanderers, learning luminaries, and achievement adventurers. And the dimensions that I focus on are learning focused, grade focused versus learning focused, and then structured versus exploratory in their approach towards life. Wisdom wanderers are exploratory and learning focused. Learning luminaries are structured but learning focused, and then achievement adventurers are grade focused but exploratory. Now there's a lot more nuance in what each of those in-depth more means, but that's kind of like the frame that I use to think about my audience. Now this video is definitely more oriented towards wisdom wanderers, of course, but some of my other videos are more achievement oriented, like my video on the only video on motivation that you need to watch as a college freshman. Another example is coming to a new, simpler equation for solving a math or an engineering problem, right? There's the one that your class gives you, and then imagine if you came with your own equation that's just like better. Now that might be really hard to do as a student, of course, but that would be kind of cool, not gonna lie. Then there's creating your own meta principles for how to study/learn effectively to improve your thinking, critical learning, and grades for yourself. Not taking someone else's, not even consciously reflecting on someone else's and then embodying them in your own, but like your own meta principles for what learning even means. Now that's pretty hard to do. At this point, I think we have a much better understanding of learning, but there's still more to do. You can do it. Coming to your own ecology of practices and meta principles for doing spirituality. It's one thing to copy and paste others' practices for spirituality onto you. It's one thing to adapt it to your life context and flow with what you're wanting to do. Even this going meta video, I don't want you to adopt rigidly. Think about how to adopt it into your life across what you need for your season. And then lastly, you can go meta creating in like I have with creating spiritual theories like spiral knowing, the meta hexagon, and integral theory, as I've been talking about through this video. So that's going meta in a nutshell. We've gone quite deep together, have we not? But there's still so much more to go, because the last part of going meta is realizing that I'm not a person that exists outside of you. I am pixels on a screen talking to you through YouTube about going meta. And you are taking those principles of going meta and thinking that you've learned everything about going meta, but you haven't taken the last leap in realizing that I'm in your imagination. Everything that you are taking about going meta is from your own relationship to reality. There's nothing outside of you that is telling you to go meta. I'm you telling you to go meta. I am you reminding you of your inherent nature as spirit, the boundless, infinite, groundless ground which encapsulates all of reality. I'm pointing you towards 3 fundamental illusions throughout this whole video without you even realizing it that are making you not realize this. One is the illusion of objectivity. You think that truth or reality exists independently from you. And yet when in your entire existence have you ever had that validated indirect experience? Think about it. Have you ever experienced something that wasn't in your experience? No, even the idea of objectivity, that there is something outside of you, is in your experience. That's very trippy. And then this breaks the illusion of separation, which is believing that you're separate from the things that you witness in consciousness. You and I are not separate. Everything that you take from me, there is no objective external substance leading you to take the things that you are. Sure, you might think my words are leading you to certain directions, but what's interpreting the words? You. So it's not like my words are leading you in one literal direction. It is your relationship to the words which are leading you to the conclusions you're making. We're not separate. We're the same. I'm you telling you that you're not separate. And finally, this breaks the illusion of self, believing that you're the localized entity inside reality, the finite character exploring to make coherence and navigate the world. And what you realize is that you are not the local entity. You are not the person in the movie theater watching the movie. You are not the projector, the witness watching it. You're all of it at the same time. You are the movie screen, you're the person watching it, you're the projector, you're the whole movie theater. You are all of reality. You are spirit. You are absolute infinity. You are God. But yourself attaches to matter, to body, to mind because it's scared of dying. It's scared of changing from what it believes it always was. It's scared of psychologically ending. Perhaps rightfully so. Maybe realizing this is not what you should be doing in your life right now. Maybe embodying the self even more is what you should be doing. And perhaps one day, after enough time has passed from this video, or even right now, maybe it's happening right now, you'll realize that I am simply you reminding yourself that you're spirit, imagining that it is reminding itself that you're spirit, but not accepting it. And that you always were spirit, always am, and always will be. And when you realize this, the love, the compassion, the consciousness in infinite degrees will emanate from you in such a radiance that it will light not just the entire earth, but the entire cosmos with its light. Check out my cosmic journaling kit in the description if you like this video. Again, it's a gamified journaling system that will help you grow your emotional centeredness, your self-understanding, and purposefulness, as well as do a lot of the stuff in this video. And it has over 1,000 journaling questions and 5 journaling templates to help you do exactly that. It's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed making this one. My voice is dead. As always, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Eat some peanut butter, and bye-bye.